This is the DSPN.
Probably the game of the round, from a certain point of view, the Crusaders Brumbies match on Friday in Canberra. This game was a great contest, back and forth. You saw the Crusaders go to a lead, Brumbies ran them down. I think that sort of last 5 or 6 minutes, a lot of controversy around that. I guess, there's a lot of angles you can attack this from, but can we be too angry at the referee for getting that wrong?
Well, well, I'm not convinced by that. Some of the arguments that are being put forward. First and foremost, a lot of it, it was emotional. There was so much at stake because second place on the table is better than third, and significantly. I think they also, they're looking for an Australian team to really challenge for the title, and that would have been a great way to put down a marker by beating the Crusaders. To boil it all down to one refereeing decision, I think, is drawing a long bow, because the game's 80 minutes, and there still would have been time in that game, even
they had the ball deep in the Crusaders' 22,
even if he'd called a knock-on at that point against Sevu Reece, who's to say the Crusaders couldn't have got the ball back, finished the game off with a try? You can't make that assumption. You can't assume that they would have scored either. First and foremost, my way of looking at it, after looking at it countless times, I'm still not convinced it was a knock-on. For me, a knock-on has to go forward.
Yeah.
The ball...
It doesn't really move, does it?
Well, it did move. It started off inside the 22 and ended up on the 22, or even just on the outside of the 22. The ball actually went backwards. Right. There may have been a touch forward in that. But to me, it's a moot point, because what should have happened is that there should have been a penalty against the Brumbies player diving through the ruck, which disrupted... And I understand that the law is that you're not allowed to do that anymore. So he dived through the ruck, which I think it was a contributing factor in Reece not being able to pick it up cleanly. So to me, it could just as easily have been a penalty against the Brumbies. So there's those two things. But as I say, in the end, to boil it down to that, when they had other opportunities, particularly towards the end, they had the ball inside the 22, and it took a terrific tackle by Scott Barrett on Tory Tool.
Yeah, brilliant.
That was a game saver to dislodge the ball. But again, they had an opportunity to win the game, and they didn't take it. So, you can understand why there's been some controversy about it. But as I say, it's a stretch to say, A, it cost us the game, B, it cost us a place in the top two. And I thought Stephen Larkham, after the game, was pretty stoic about it, in keeping with his general demeanour. He wasn't going to make too much about it. But they still get a home game this week, but it just makes their task of winning that much harder.
Well, you're right. I mean, there's 75, 74, however many previous minutes where they could have righted some wrongs, and there's a period at the end there where they had an opportunity, they didn't take it. And, had something gone differently, say, in the first half, that, butterfly effect, that changes things from then on. So,
and the other thing too, Lachlan, is, and I've done quite a few games in Canberra over the years. Obviously, we've all watched a lot of games from Canberra. I think there have been a few cases over the years where the Brumbies have had some hairline 50-50, and sometimes even downright egregious decisions go in their favour that have enabled them to win games over the course of their existence. They have been a great side at times. They've always been competitive, but that's a hard place to win for a reason. And one of the reasons is the crowd there ride the referee probably more than anywhere else.
I've never heard, it's been a while since I've heard that much booing come through the TV speakers, at least with an Australian crowd when it comes to Super Rugby. I haven't heard that in a while.
It's not uncommon for that, and they get onto the referee's case, and I've seen referees fold there. And particularly if
the crowd wasn't a packed house, it was a decent crowd, but if that's a packed house as well, geez, if you're a referee, you're a bit nervous and you're standing there in the pitch cold as well.
Well, so as I say, they've had plenty go their way, and there may be swings and roundabouts, but just to repeat the point that I'm making, I'm not entirely convinced that A, it was a knock-on, and B, it shouldn't have been a penalty to the Crusaders anyway. So
agreed. Just quickly, Crusaders, have they shown enough, or did they show enough on Friday to sort of settle any nerves around their performance? Because I think you've been a bit like me. I think Murray Mixted said a similar thing on the podcast. Marty's been a bit more positive about the Crusaders, but they've stumbled just a little bit the last maybe month or so. Have they shown enough, do you think?
It's a quantum improvement on last year. Let's not forget that, where they were coming
fair
from.
Fair enough.
They have dropped a couple of games, losing to Moana Pasifika. Yeah. That was a real shock.
I think even the eye test, though, the last month or so, they haven't been as good as they were maybe sort of in that middle part of the year.
No, but they're still second on the table. Yeah. There's still a chance to win it. I mean, they set a very high bar for themselves, the Crusaders. And so they may not be amongst the great Crusaders teams, but they are still right in the thick of it, in the top two. Home advantage, probably until if it's a final against the Chiefs. Chiefs lose, they'll get the final at home. They'll be hellishly hard to beat. And signs are that they might get a few players back. If not this week, then next. They've had a few out. Fletcher Newell, who was just playing outstandingly well, he's a possibility to come back. Obviously, Ethan Blackadder coming back into the side. They're not yet of the elite Crusaders level, but they're still there and they're still dangerous. And they're still definitely one of the top two teams to beat.
Well, 11 wins out of 14, that tells you all you really need to know, right? Yep. Hurricanes Moana Pasifika on Saturday ended up being just an absolute blowout in the Canes' favour. The first 5 or 10 minutes, you could argue, was when Ruben Love threw this pass that didn't need to be thrown, really, and then got picked off. I thought maybe it was just a sign of a few nerves for the Canes, but Moana threw a punch, Canes then threw a bunch of haymakers, and they just ran away with it.
Yeah, first and foremost.
That was ominous, I thought. That was ominous.
But first and foremost, best crowd of the season.
Yeah.
And that's testimony to the drawing power of Moana Pasifika, and in particular, of course, the Savia brothers going back to Wellington. That was great. Created a lovely backdrop to the game.
It wasn't it nice seeing Julian get a couple of big hits through the line as well? I really liked that, actually.
It was.
Wound back the clock a little bit.
Look, I can't help but think they emptied the tank against the Blues.
Yeah.
That was an outstanding performance, phenomenal performance. And
they were both there, yeah.
Yeah, and it was always going to be hard to replicate that, certainly the next week. And having lost that game the week after, and that was a hellishly hard end to their season when they had to play the Blues, Chiefs and Hurricanes in consecutive weeks. That's really tough.
Yep.
And as I say, I'm not sure they had a lot left in the tank after that win at Albany. But look, take nothing away from them. They have lit this competition up this year. It would have been, I'm sure all of the neutrals would have loved to have seen them in the playoffs. Didn't quite happen. But again, if they can keep that group together, and that extends to the coaching staff, because that's really important, then next year there's no reason to suspect that they can't go a step further.
Well, you'd imagine they'll get better. If this is the first year of having Ardie Savea there, some of these other, like Patrick Pellegrini, Tomoe Folau, these guys emerging, and that coaching group as well, you'd think that 12 months from now, they'll be even better, surely.
Well, you'd hope so. I mean, it just really depends
who they can hold on to, right?
Who they can hang on to.
Because Tomoe Folau apparently is heading to the Chiefs.
There's been talk about that.
There's been rumours.
Yeah, I'd love to see him stay where he is,
of course,
because to me, he's been one of the outstanding contributors to their season. Just absolutely brilliant player, but who knows? That would be disappointing for them if they lost him. But they played some terrific rugby. Their second half stats, and particularly their final quarter stats in terms of the number of points that they've been able to score, just off the scale. Ardie Savea, the best player in Super Rugby.
Yep. Probably the best in the world right now. Maybe there's a bit of bias down south
It's
here.
always hard to make that judgment based on Super Rugby form. If you can play like that in the test matches, well, yeah, no question about it. But I suppose silver lining, if you're an All Black selector, All Black coach, you're probably quietly thinking to yourself, probably quite good for their perspective that he's going to have a couple of weeks off now, because he has just absolutely emptied it, laid it out there every single week. Quite phenomenal. And I've said it and I'll stick to it. I don't ever remember a better or more influential individual performance in Super Rugby history than the one he produced against the Blues. So, look, they have had a meaningful season. They've contributed a lot. I think the move to North Harbour's been good for them. They seem to have attracted a crowd, a loyal crowd there, but they also started, growing their support.
Yeah.
And that was so important, because the fan base had been disappointing up till this season. So no reason, particularly if they can hang on to Ardie. I mean, there is talk maybe of him looking for a sabbatical season next year, but if they can hang on to him in particular...
You'd like to think one more year at least, surely.
Yeah, then who knows what they can achieve next year. But let's just give them credit for what they have brought to Super Rugby this year.
And they've gotten some good wins over some Kiwi sides as well, which, as we know in this competition, that's almost a bit of a marker. If you're gonna be a contender, you need to beat the Kiwi sides.
I think probably when they look back at their season, the one that got away on them, the one that could have made the difference in the end, although you talk about the butterfly effect, game one. They had the force. They had the lead. Yep. They had them backed up against their own goal line, and somehow the force broke away and scored an absolutely brilliant try.
Yeah. 14 points with 30 minutes to go, wasn't that the lead?
Yeah, they had
something
a good lead. And it just fell away. And it's funny, because I mentioned before how good they've been in the last quarter. Well, that game it was the opposite effect. If that game hadn't got away on them, they might well have made the top six.
DSPN.